Let's take a look at cellular respiration. So in cellular respiration, cells are going to break down glucose or other organic molecules because we do have other types of food that we eat. So we eat proteins and lipids as well. And these are going to be catabolic reactions. So we're going to break down these larger molecules into smaller pieces. And these molecules, such as glucose, are going to be storing energy in their chemical bonds. And when we break them apart and break the chemical bonds, that's going to release the energy. And so these are going to be exergonic reactions because they're going to be releasing energy. And then we're going to capture that energy and make ATP. And then ATP is going to be used by the cell to do work. So maybe we're going to move our muscles, or maybe we're going to do some anabolic reactions. So take the smaller molecules and make a bigger molecule, or maybe we're going to do active transport. So all of those will require energy to do, and that's what we'll use the ATP for. So here's the formula for cellular respiration. So I definitely would know that for the exam, be able to recognize that in a multiple choice question. So we've got glucose, which is a carbohydrate, which is the C6H12O6, and the O2 is oxygen. And then these are what you're going to start with, and then we're going to break apart the glucose, and all those carbons and glucose would be turned into the waste product, carbon dioxide. And then we do need oxygen to do cellular respiration, so that's why we've got to keep breathing, because if we stop breathing and we run out of oxygen, we're no longer able to make ATP, and everything is going to shut down and die in her body, and we won't be here anymore. Okay, and then we also will produce some water as well. Okay, so we've got 3 steps for cellular respiration. First step is glycolysis, and then our second step is the citric acid cycle, and our third step is called oxidative phosphorylation. And oxidative phosphorylation has 2 parts to it. There's the electron transport chain and something called chemiosmosis. All right, so we've got some electron carriers that are going to be used in cellular respiration, because as we break apart our glucose and break those chemical bonds, we're actually going to be ripping electrons off of the glucose. And those electrons actually contain energy. And we're going to be releasing some of that energy from the electrons and using that to make ATP. So these electron carriers are called NAD+, and I think of these electron carriers like a little dump truck. Okay, so here's NAD+. So when the dump truck's empty, it's called NAD+, but when we put our electrons in here, and that's my abbreviation for electrons with a negative charge on them, then it becomes NADH. So the empty dump truck is NAD+, and then the full dump truck with carrying the electrons is just called NADH. And it's the same thing with FAD. So FAD would be the empty dump truck, not carrying any electrons. And then when it picks up the electrons as you're breaking apart your food, then it becomes FADH2. Okay, and where these electron carriers are going to take their electrons is they're going to dump them off at the electron transport chain. Okay, and that'll be in our third step that we'll use our electron transport chain. So I just abbreviate the electron transport chain as ETC. That's a little bit easier than writing the whole thing out. Okay, so just the summary of what's going on with these electrons. So these electrons are starting off on our food, on glucose, and as we break apart the glucose, we're going to rip electrons off of it. And we're going to put the electrons into our empty electron carriers, our empty dump truck. And then once they're full of electrons, then they'll become either NADH or FADH2. So those are the electron carriers when they're full. And then they're just going to dump those electrons off at the electron transport chain. And then once they've dumped them off, then they'll be empty again, and then they can go back and pick up some more electrons from another molecule of glucose that you're breaking down. And then at the end of the electron transport chain, we've got to put the electrons somewhere. We can't just release them in the body because they can do a lot of damage. So we're going to hand them off to oxygen because oxygen loves electrons. So we'll just give them to oxygen, and when we do that, we end up making water. Okay. All right, and here's just what our electron transport chain looks like. And where it's located in the mitochondria is in the inside the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So our mitochondria have two membranes. There's an outer membrane, which is in red in this picture, and then in the gray, that's the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So that's where this electron transport chain is located. And we've got lots of electron transport chains all throughout this inner membrane. So there's not just one, but there's lots of them in here. So this is our electron transport chain, and you can see the NADH is dropping off its electrons. And then we have the empty dump truck over here, the NAD+. And here's the electrons going down the electron transport chain, and at the end, we'll give them to oxygen, and then the oxygen turns into water. So you can see why you have to keep breathing, because if you run out of oxygen and there's no oxygen to accept the electrons at the end of the electron transport chain, your mitochondria don't work, and then you can't make ATP, and then you die. So, okay, so a couple of important things to know for the test. The first one is, where do the steps of cellular respiration occur in eukaryotic cells? So glycolysis is going to occur in the cytoplasm. The second step, the citric acid cycle, will occur in the mitochondrial matrix. This is kind of in the inside of the mitochondria. And then oxidative phosphorylation, where the electron transport chain and this chemiosmosis, we'll talk about that later, that's going to occur in the inner membrane of the mitochondrion. So let's just take a look at a picture. So glycolysis, our first step of cellular respiration, is going to occur outside the mitochondria in the cytoplasm. Citric acid cycle is going to occur in the middle of the mitochondria, called the mitochondrial matrix. And then oxidative phosphorylation is going to occur in the inner membrane of the mitochondrion. So you've got an outer membrane and then this inner membrane, so that's where the oxidative phosphorylation occurs. So that's where your electron transport chain is. Okay, and then just the last thing, which cellular respiration steps can occur when no oxygen is available? So the only step that can occur if there's no oxygen available is the first step, glycolysis. The other two steps, the citric acid cycle and oxidative phosphorylation, cannot occur if there's no oxygen available because they're occurring in the mitochondrion, and if there's no oxygen available, your mitochondria don't work. So they can't occur if there's no oxygen. So only glycolysis can occur.